Hello and welcome back to Dadsplaining Politics. We've been away for a few weeks, so sorry about that for our loyal listeners. But we're back and we'll be on every 2 weeks from now on.
We definitely will be. I guess we've had a bit of a hiatus, you could call it. Both of us have been off, exploring the world, exploring politics, as we gotta do to keep you guys entertained. So we're just doing extra research and now we're back with all these insights that we've gained and we're hoping to bring them to you.
So we're going to give you a pre-Christmas show now, talking about the latest on the Epstein files, the latest on Ukraine. Of course, we'll discuss the horrible terrorist attack that happened in Bondi and some of the political results of that, gun control, etc. in Australia. So shall we start off with the Epstein files?
Yeah, definitely. Let's start off with that. Okay, so I guess I'll say everything we know up until now, right? So obviously the Epstein files have been a hot topic for an incredibly long time, not just because of Donald Trump's place in the files, but also because of a lot of other prominent figures, as we've seen in the past few days. People like Bill Clinton, I think we saw Michael Jackson, we saw Hillary Clinton, we saw a bunch of big power players, in the US appearing in these documents, even Noam Chomsky, who is an incredibly important, one of the most cited academics in recent history. He is an expert on power structures and hierarchy and the role of the elite, and it's very interesting that he was even seen in these files. And so with a lot of pressure from, the American public and then Congress, these files have now been released. We talked about that pressure in the past, how if Trump hadn't agreed to release them, it would have appeared very suspicious on his part. So the agreement to release them seems to be pushing in another direction, trying to play it off as if it's not a big deal. Now they've been released. I think the internet has gone kind of wild with a lot of the stuff that's been shown. And I think the reality of what happened on Epstein's Island is something so sickening. I don't think a lot of people can really comprehend it or want to comprehend it.
Mm-hmm. Bill Clinton was featured a lot. The former Prince Andrew was in there, etc., etc. I think still quite a lot was redacted, but I think there is still some incredibly incendiary stories in here about some very famous people, including Trump. So I'm not sure Trump is out of the woods yet in terms of danger from the Epstein files. It'll be interesting how that plays out going forward, because he's lost a bit of support in his MAGA base due to this, because you can say one thing about MAGA people, they have sort of extreme views from our point of view, but often they're sort of the religious right, and so they can't come at this sort of child molestation, etc. That sort of obviously crosses the line even for those people. So he's lost somewhat of a support from the MAGA base because of the stain of this Epstein files, even though stuff hasn't been proven solidly against him.
I mean, I would almost say as well, I don't know if it's just the fact that they are very religious, right-wing based. I mean, we've seen a lot of child molestation stories when it comes to the Catholic Church, right? So I don't know if it's necessarily that they are some kind of pioneer of human rights for children, or saving them from that type of horrific abuse. But I think it's just that there are a lot more middle ground people than you expect. Even in MAGA, there are people who aren't extremists. There are people who are just trying to get by. And I think that just for most ordinary people, whether you're left or right, an issue like this and someone who is a child sex trafficker like Epstein is generally viewed as not a nice guy and a pretty malicious person to be friends with, regardless of what side of politics you're on. So that's definitely interesting. I know as well that I thought when these files were going to be released, there was so much fuss kicked up about it. I didn't realize how much they could redact information from the files. I thought the whole premise of the thing is that you have to give all the information. Otherwise, why? I don't know, why are we treating it like that big of a deal? I'm quite confused, because half the faces seem to be blacked out, half the names seem to be blacked out. We've learned basically nothing from this except Bill Clinton seems to be in a lot of precarious positions with a lot of these, named people, and maybe even underage women. That could all be a guise and a technique by the Trump administration to just point fingers away from him and to point it towards other prominent figures.
Quite likely. Trump's not having a good time recently because, the inflation is out of control in the US, and he's now starting to get a bit of the blame for that, which is kind of ironic given that that's what he criticized Biden for. And they had this rally recently to talk about what they're doing about inflation, and it was all a bit of a disaster, right? It seemed like they were out of touch, and they were saying it was a hoax, and people came away from that saying, well, it's not a hoax, that I can't afford my rent and I can't afford. You see, the description that Trump gives us stuff, his crazy, non-truthful descriptions, is now coming home to roost, because even his best supporters realize he says this is a hoax, and they say it's not a hoax because I can't afford my groceries anymore. You see, it's clashing with their real life. So it's a really interesting dynamic now happening in the US.
Well, yeah, definitely. It's gotten to the point where people's real lives and, their actual ability to eat food and have food on the table is being threatened. And I think when you get down to that very base level of survival, you really start to, just not take the bullshit anymore.
I agree. And I heard a stat the other day that 50% of Americans are skipping their medication because they can't afford it. 50%. And this is just astounding stuff.
Yeah, but I wonder with that what the statistic would have been even a few years ago, because I feel that
probably would have
for a
still
long
been
time it still would have been pretty bad.
But given the Medicaid cuts and all that stuff, I'm sure it's gone up from a lower percentage.
And it just makes you think, you don't know how anyone in their right mind could see this as a good thing, reducing free healthcare for all. Obviously, it's a socialist communist experiment, according to a lot of people, I think, in the US. But it just coming from Australia, where we have such good public healthcare and where everything is such excellent prices, really, it's so difficult to understand how you could have a different mindset that doesn't understand it in that way. I think it's also really interesting when we look at the Epstein files, because this is causing a huge issue for Trump and the base, but it's not the only issue that she, as you're saying. We're also talking about rising inflation. We're also talking about the America First policy. I think that's another one of the really important divisive issues in the MAGA base at the moment.
I read another article today, the impact of the tariffs. An example, Jim Beam, who is the biggest producer of American whiskey, they're stopping all production for 2026 because Canadians are no longer buying American liquor because of the tariffs, etc. Their sales collapse, so they're halting production for an entire year to use their existing supply. This is an iconic American brand, an example of the impact of the tariffs.
And as that's happening, and as people are unable to afford food, Trump is still supplying ridiculous amounts of money to Israel, also supplying a lot of money to Ukraine, also deciding whether or not he should, start a war with Venezuela, which seems ridiculous under the circumstances what we're in right now, increasing US troops and Navy.
But I don't know whether you saw the latest military strategy paper from the US government. Their whole focus will be the Americas. They have a whole flotilla. They have something like 150 Navy personnel, aircraft carriers, 10 destroyers, etc. in the Caribbean. Now, their whole focus is going to be there, and so this goes along the lines of, let's leave Europe to Putin, let's leave Asia to Xi, and our area is the Americas.
But I agree that maybe that's what Trump is trying to play it off as in America first, including Latin America. But I don't think that's what his base interpreted it as. I feel like they interpreted it as USA comes first and everyone else falls behind. I don't think they want to be having any wars with any foreign power, let alone one that they wouldn't even consider important, like Venezuela. No, I don't think the MAGA base want that even. I don't think they're interested in it. I think it's below them in terms of importance. They want to focus on...
I think, what do you think's behind the Venezuela thing? I was reading that Venezuela has really good quality oil. The US is now producing a lot more oil via this fracking and shale oil, but it's not as good a quality, whereas Venezuelan oil is thick oil and really good quality. So I hear a theory that Trump fundamentally wants to, have Exxon or someone take over Venezuela, one of the big oil companies, so that they can get access to this resource.
And I mean, I suppose if you're going to do that anywhere, Venezuela kind of makes sense because it's relatively small and obviously has been going through a lot of political upheaval in recent years anyway. But I'll say the other potential reason for it, I think a lot of this stuff can come down to Trump's own reputation and his own pride. And on a really surface level, you look at Maduro, right? And Maduro is obviously quite a powerful right-wing politician in Venezuela at the moment. And he does not respect Trump, and he is not bowing down to Trump in the way that many far-right politicians across the world have done. I mean, I don't know if I can necessarily name another far-right politician who's gone against Trump in such an obvious way, in such an oppositional way.
True.
So I think, honestly, some of his decisions, his strategists will say, oh, it's for the oil, oh, it's so we have a foot in Latin America and we can, have a base there. But honestly, I think when it comes down to it, maybe Trump just has a little bit of an ego.
And there's some question about Trump's health because he's seen it a bit wobbly with his grandson after Thanksgiving recently, and supposedly he's had a number of brain scans. So as these leaders get older, obviously health becomes an issue.
No, definitely. And I mean, I think this is something that I also brought up a while ago, but you kind of scoffed at me because it was probably a theory of the left. But, there was a lot of stuff on social media on the kind of unreliable, like posts on Instagram, theories, etc. side of social media I sometimes find myself on, saying that, there was a lot of discoloration of his hands, saying it looked like he could have had a stroke. There were several symptoms he seemed to be exhibiting that had shown he could have had a stroke, or he could just have a lot of blood issues going on. So it definitely seems that there are signs of him getting a lot older.
Anyway, time will tell. 2026, the Epstein files and Trump's health, etc.
Etc.
Shall we move to Ukraine?
Yes, let's move to Ukraine if you want to start off with that.
Sure. Again, it seems like a bit of an impasse, right? The war's still going on, still talk of trying to do this ceasefire, but I don't think the Russians are serious about it. And the problem is, I don't think Trump's serious about it. And the Europeans are too weak to stand up and make a power move and put boots on the ground and supply all the weapons. At the same time, you might have heard that Zelensky's chief of staff was arrested for corruption. So Zelensky's popularity has taken a hit somewhat because he's sort of, nobody's accused him of corruption, but it's close to the source, right? And so there's big questions about, is Zelensky the person to take Ukraine forward? And he must be kind of exhausted after multiple years of this war ongoing and no end in sight. So this stuff goes on and on for good, and it's kind of frustrating because it never seems to get to a conclusion.
Definitely. And I think that's really dangerous, just in the way that Zelensky, I think, is the right person definitely to lead Ukraine through this. But the perseverance you have to have, and if you see, the person, he used to be someone so full of joy and so full of exuberance about his life. He was a comedian, and now he's become this person who just has seemingly the weight of the world on his shoulders. Having people question whether you should even be in that position anymore and question your responsibility, maybe question if you've committed corruption, would be such a massive blow after you've been so close to, the source of everything, and so close to probably death for such a long time. Had people on the lookout for him probably every day, had to have such high security measures, had to, go to face with people like Trump who with just utter disrespect for him and everything he's doing. Even a lot of European leaders, I don't think they respect him as much as they should. Otherwise, we would see some action, to back up their words.
Yeah, I mean, the Europeans have given multiple billions. They haven't unlocked the ill-gotten gains of Russia yet, which again is, I think, a power move that they should do. They should take those hundreds of billions of dollars and provide them for rebuilding Ukraine and supporting Ukraine. I mean, I'm just frustrated with the Europeans that they just don't get on with this stuff and get moving. You know, they're a huge power. They're a much greater military thing than the Russians, right? And they should just realize their power, and they're just waiting on Trump, and they're going to be waiting forever.
Yeah, look, I completely agree. I think that it's been a downward spiral for a long time, and I just wonder how long Ukraine can keep this up, right? If you feel that you have no other support. And I think it's all depending on Zelensky. So I think watch this space, see how he is. I think the biggest disaster would be for something to happen to him, because then I think Ukraine is lost, to be honest. To be quite pessimistic about it, I think that that's it. And Europe will... You know, they've already started shoring up their own defences. If you look at the rest of Europe, if you look at the rates of people signing up to go into the army, if you look at Finland, if you look at all of those Baltic states, you'll see that they're starting to back into defence mode.
Yeah, Estonia's built this incredible barrier for tanks and everything else all along their border. It's pretty amazing,
But for that to happen...
stuff.
Ukraine would have to.
But the problem is, Ukraine has the best army in Western Europe, right? Because they're battle ready and they're incredibly good. Europe needs to make sure that stays in place and are supported fully, because if you're European, you want the war to end in Ukraine, not move into Poland or the Baltic states, etc., right? It's just crazy stuff.
I don't think they view Ukraine like the sacrifice that it is. I think
they must, darling. If we see this, smart people, I just don't know why they lack courage.
Well, yeah, I'm just saying, I just think there must... I think some Europeans just think this is... Some of them, not all of them. I'm not saying the politicians necessarily, but I'm saying the everyday people think that this is maybe a Ukrainian issue.
Right,
and
everyday people.
An Eastern European state issue. It's not a European issue, because they just don't realise how vital Ukraine is to Europe itself. Because they don't even view Ukraine as part of Europe.
Oh, look, I don't think it's a matter of Ukraine being vital. I just think this is where you've got to stop the advance.
Well, that's what I'm saying. That's why I'm saying it's vital. That's why I'm saying it's vital. Saying from a purely selfish point of view, I don't think they've looked at it in a selfish, personal way. I think they've looked at it in like a foreign relations, oh, that's terrible that Ukraine is going through this. But how is it really going to affect us that much? I think every European should be a lot more scared than they are at this present moment, especially when we look at, Germany and Poland, etc.
No, I agree. So again, something to be interesting how that all plays out in 2026.
And then finally, we go to probably the most sad, upsetting section of our podcast for today. We're going to talk a little bit about the terrorism attack that happened a week and a half ago, I think it is now. It happened on a Friday evening. It was at Bondi, obviously one of our most prominent sites in Australia, one that's known across the world. It really is a symbol, I think, of Australian lifestyle. It's a symbol of the beach, it's a symbol of joy, it's a symbol of, community. And obviously what happened on that day is, hot summer day in Australia, a lot of people are at the beach, thousands of people. There was a really important Hanukkah celebration happening. It was the first day of Hanukkah, so it was a festival. I think there was a small farm for the kids to play with. There was face painting. There was a whole bunch of stuff happening, and it was just a beautiful moment for celebration. And that's when the guns started shooting.
Yes, two individuals who were purported to be supporting Islamic State. From Western Sydney.
But inspired by Islamic State. They're not part of Islamic State.
A father and son with shotguns, etc. Supposedly had IEDs, explosive devices that they threw towards the Hanukkah gathering, but they fortunately didn't go off. Then
there were also some in the car. I'm not sure if they threw them. They also threw them towards the gathering.
Then they started shooting at the Hanukkah gathering, and that's when most of the fatalities occurred. Awful things, including one 12-year-old girl. The police responded rather quickly because there's police there. One policeman was badly injured and several others injured.
I think two were badly injured.
Yeah. And then one of the positive things out of this was There was a Syrian refugee who's become an Australian citizen who saw what was happening and went and ran and wrestled the gun off the father, and he got shot a few minutes later, not fatally, but in the arm, etc. So he's become a hero of the nation, and that was a nice.
What's his name again? Ahmed.
And that was a nice thing that this refugee from Syria, clearly a Muslim as well, went to protect his fellow Australians, whether they were Jewish or Christian or whatever. He didn't care. He's very pleased to be an Australian, and he used to be a Syrian policeman in Syria, right? So he knows about guns, etc. But he's the hero of the moment, and it was a nice side effect that he was a Muslim who stopped further killing, because they say if he hadn't tackled the person, there would have been more killing.
I mean, there definitely would have been. I think that a lot happened in a very small amount of time. And I mean, I think that we have to, if we're going to talk about Ahmed, we just have to talk about the rising anti-Semitism, of course, that has been happening over the past couple years. And I want to say as well, as someone who has been very vocal in my support for Palestine, none of that has ever meant to reflect any sort of anti-Semitism. I mean, like, the love for the Jewish community, like, I have it. I think a lot of people in our circle, in our family, we have it. Just have grown up with a lot of people in the Jewish community, and I mean, not that you have to grow up with them to feel some sort of connection to them and understand like the plight of being in a religious minority that faces such dangerous situations really in modern Australia. Yeah, I think we just want to say that this is a horrible time for everyone, and it's just one of those times we really need to come together, because it can be difficult to be in any group that's persecuted in such a disgusting way.
No, it's awful, and I think the Prime Minister said it correctly when he said an attack on Jewish Australians is an attack on all Australians. It is right that we need to come together as a country, because this can be used politically as a divisive issue. There's a lot of talk now that the government hasn't moved quickly enough and needs to do more, and that could well be right? At the memorial service this past Sunday, Albanese and his wife were booed by lots of the crowd, and he apologised to the Jewish Australian community and said, yes, we probably should have done more and could have done more. So, but now, Susan Lee in the opposition is criticising, people for not crying and showing up. Penny Wong has never shed a tear for this thing. So I find this dangerous, because this is quite unusual for the opposition to try and politicise such a thing. When we've had terrorist attacks in the past, generally the opposition has sort of supported the government in this regard. But politically it's interesting, because I think Chris Minns' popularity has increased through this whole thing, whereas Albanese's has really taken a hit. And what is the difference there? Chris Minns showed a lot of empathy, has been involved in funerals and synagogues, etc., etc. But he's also a person of action. He recalled Parliament and is putting in place stricter gun laws, which are going to pass probably before Christmas. So this mix of the everyday man and being really empathetic and really genuinely touched and sorry for this. I heard an interview with him the other day, and he and his wife and family go to Mass every Sunday. And he said, how would we feel if we had to have security guards at the Catholic Church when we go to Mass? And which is a really good analogy, because unless you've experienced that, going into a synagogue and needing security guards, or at your children's school, it's an awful thing, and people shouldn't have to live that way in our country. So I think we need to do much more to support and protect the Jewish community. And so whether that needs to be a royal commission, my view is it doesn't need to be. This is a very Australian thing. Whenever anything goes wrong, let's do a royal commission. The fact is, if a royal commission can mean there's changes to the way we do things so that it's less likely this sort of thing to happen again, great. But I'm sure there's other ways of doing this, but it's always the political thing, well, you have to do a royal commission, right?
Yeah, definitely. I also think I'm going to come in from the other side of it. And look, I completely understand everyone out there who's saying that the government should have done far more. But just to look at the other side of it, I wonder what you think that they should have done. Because look, they've already made a few advances in terms of banning a lot of
Hate
Nazi
speech.
iconography, banning hate speech. The government even moved to ban a number of protests that are actually very democratically agreeable, I guess you could say. There was a number of protests that were going to go ahead that were organised by the Palestine Action Group, right? Like the March for Humanity, which happened and went across the Harbour Bridge. I think the government moved to ban that, even though it was a peaceful protest that you actually went to, which showed no signs of violence whatsoever. I don't know, I think it's interesting when then we look back, and it's easy to say, look, Albanese is responsible for this, but, hate speech and these ideologies, the anti-Semitic ideologies that have grown across the world in the past 2 years, I don't really think they can be controlled by a government. I don't think a government can efficiently set out to remove anti-Semitism from the entire country.
Freddie, I think you're right, but the problem is when you're in charge, you're held responsible by the people. It's a rather simplistic thing to say this happened on Albanese's watch. You're quite right to say what more could they have done. They could have implemented some of the stuff they're doing more quickly. They had the woman who looked into this, the whole anti-Semitism, and she said they've already implemented a number of the recommendations, but they haven't implemented them all. And she even admitted they could have moved a bit more quickly, which is probably difficult for the government, given their chosen person said they could have moved more quickly. But it's always the case that whoever's in charge is held responsible, because people, the number one priority that people hold the governments to is keeping people safe, keeping the population safe. And then secondly, it's making sure people have jobs and making sure people get healthcare and education, etc. But keeping the country safe is a super important thing. And you're quite right to say it's a high bar, because what more could they have done, right? They're talking about there could be better communication and coordination between ASIO and the federal police and the local police, etc. But it is pretty hard to stop these, one-off crazies and terrorists, right?
I mean, it definitely is. I think you look at any of these issues, look at racism in general. I mean, obviously there's no easy cure for racism. Otherwise, I'm sure we would have implemented it a long time ago. But here we are in today's day, and we see, Islamophobia and anti-Semitism everywhere. We still see racism, in every school, in every company, in every community in Australia, whether it's to a big extent or to a small extent, right? It's everywhere, and it's everywhere in the world, and it's a very human thing that is very difficult to control and very difficult to deal with. I guess a lot of people would say the answer to this type of prejudice is education and communication, and just implementing reforms so people understand what it's like to be in another person's shoes. But that's a difficult thing to put into action, to actualize.
It's difficult, but it's a challenge we have to take up as a country, because we need to ensure that we are one of the most successful multicultural countries in the world, and you don't want that ruined by a terrorism incident like this, because then the terrorists are winning, in a sense, if the country doesn't come together and it sort of tears itself apart, which I don't think will happen. But obviously people are feeling hurt and wounded and scared, and it's a volatile mix at the moment.
Definitely. I mean, there's a specific word for that, actually, basal security. It's your base level security, I suppose, you feel every day when you go out to the shops, when you go to the theatre, etc. It's how comfortable you feel being in that environment. And the reason why terrorism is such a terrifying thing, and has always been, I think, to many of us growing up, is because it violates that basal security. Everything you do in everyday life suddenly has a much more violent undercurrent, and you can't forget about it anytime soon. So Australia's always seemed a very safe place. I think a lot of people would come here and say it's much safer than their hometown. A lot of Americans even would come here and say they feel much more secure with much less gun violence, etc. But now we've had such a horrific incident that has violated that security. And so the everyday person is confronted with this realistic, this realistic, dangerous world that we do live in and is happening right now.
Mm-hmm.
It's also important to note when we look at these terrorists, right? There can be very different type of terrorist attacks, right? There can be ones that have been orchestrated by a terrorist group such as ISIS or Al-Qaeda. Obviously, they're the most famous ones. But there can also be isolated lone actor terror attacks. And those are the ones which are the most difficult to stop because they could be any member of the community. Any member of the community who maybe has had a lot of troubles over their life, maybe has some mental issues, and then has been put down this path where they become radicalized and they take the final steps. So anti-Semitism has a lot to play in it, yes, but I'm sure that these two actors who came and committed this murder spree, I'm sure that they have had a lot of radical ideas for a very long time. And, it definitely has worsened, probably over coming years, for them to commit such a horrific thing.
Absolutely.
But they are isolated actors. They are not, representative of a whole community group in Australia. They are two angry men from the same family. They didn't even have anyone else from any other family groups. They're two men.
Anyway, it's a tragic way to end the year, but hopefully 2026 will be a better year for everyone in Australia, including the Jewish community. So with that, we wish all our listeners a very happy holidays and the best wishes for 26, and we will see you again in the new year.
We will. Thank you so much for joining us, and please come back again and give us any recommendations for what you'd like to hear us talk about next time.
Bye.
Bye.